You are listening to Off the Shelf, a podcast by The Conference Board.
Hello, and welcome to this edition of Off the Shelf, the book podcast by The Conference Board. Today we will be talking about how the convergence of changing demography, new technologies, and a fragmented media ecosystem have transformed marketing as we know it. At least, that's according to Dr. Jake Beniflah, author of the book, The Big Shift. Thank you, Jake, for joining us.
Thanks, Chiqui, for having me.
My name is Chiqui Cartagena, and I am the CMO of the Conference Board and the leader of our Marketing and Communications Center. So today we will be talking about the past, the present, and the future of marketing to Latinos, and how marketers in the United States can make the big shift in order to take their businesses to new heights in the 21st century. While Hispanics are not the fastest growing segment of multicultural consumers, that would be the Asians, they are by far the largest. So they represent the biggest opportunity for business leaders to focus on, especially because they have been ignored for so long. But before we get into all of that, let's introduce our guest author. Dr. Jake Beniflah is author of The Big Shift, Redefining Marketing in a Multicultural America. He currently serves as the executive director of the Center for Multicultural Science, a leading U.S. nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank in multicultural marketing research and data science. Prior to launching the Center for Multicultural Science in 2010, Dr. Beniflah spent 15 years as a growth consultant for a number of Fortune 100 companies in the United States. Dr. Beniflah has significant experience in corporate governance, management, business strategy, data science, and organizational strategy. He is considered a thought leader and research pioneer. He is also the founder and editor-in-chief of the Journal of Cultural Marketing Strategy and guest editor of the special issue of Multicultural Marketing in the Journal of Brand Strategy. He has published more than 25 academic articles in a number of peer-reviewed journals, both in the U.S. and abroad. And he also happens to be a senior fellow here at the Conference Board. Jake, welcome again to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Chiqui. It's an honor.
Oh, please. Where do I find you today for this podcast?
I'm in sunny Los Angeles.
And that's where you live and work?
That's where I live and work. I lived in San Francisco for 35 years, and I've been in Manhattan Beach for almost a decade now. So I have to tell you that living in Southern California all year round is a blessing.
Yeah, I don't even want to ask what the temperature is. It's 27 in New York, okay?
Yeah.
But let's get started. You have dedicated your professional life to advocating for the fair and equitable representation of Latino and African American consumers in the media for almost 3 decades.
Yeah.
Why do you think now is the time to put multicultural consumers front and center of mainstream marketing to drive growth?
You know what's interesting, Chiqui, and thank you for asking that question. I've been talking about this subject for 3 decades. I kind of feel like the market has, not woken up, but has woken up to the inequities and the business opportunities. And so the fact that we're still talking about it means that there's a lot more work to do. We've undergone, I would call it a second social unrest, maybe a second civil rights movement, maybe the beginning of a second one. We will see if there's sustainable change.
You mean now as a result of the pandemic and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor?
Exactly. All of that, I think, is grassroots driven. These are all topics that are impacting, every single American, one way or the other. You can't go to sleep without, watching it on the news or even thinking about it. And so it's really at such a high level of our consciousness that, we in corporate America have to sort of say, what are we going to do about it? So, you and I have been in the business for a long time, and we've been advocating for, let's call them the minorities for a second, because that's how people saw them. And they saw them as a minority, and they deserved a seat at the table, but it was always sort of at the kids' table. I've heard that expression used many times, but I unfortunately would have to agree that it was never really equitable or even primary. The reason why we're talking about this today is that we cannot ignore the changing demographics of our country. And if you think about corporate America, their business is built on reaching, more consumers to sell more products to generate more revenue, right? And so these big cities like Los Angeles and New York and Chicago and Dallas and Houston, Phoenix, these are all driven by the Hispanic population. The majority of the population in these cities is multicultural. It's not like we are talking about an effort that is about social justice. This is really, in my view, this is my perspective. We're talking about an opportunity that a lot of companies still don't see as marketing. They see multicultural marketing as a secondary effort. They see it as a silo, and they don't think about redefining marketing in a multicultural America, which is really what the book is about.
So, if I heard you right, I mean, you obviously were writing the book before the pandemic hit, and I think you and I had talked about you were anchoring it off the 2020 census, right? The new social injustice movement just makes it even more visible. Is that what you're trying to say? Because I think that the foundation is that this is marketing in America today, correct?
That's right. That's right. And I think that we aggregate or think about or talk about corporate America in aggregate, but the reality is you have leaders, you have followers, and you have laggards. And so there are a lot of different kinds of companies out there that get it and don't get it. I'm in my early 50s. I've been in the business since I was 21, 22. I keep saying that I've taken 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. And so the level of progress to me is very slow and very incremental. And I know companies, they don't move slow. They move very quickly. But it's amazing how much work they put into progress and how little they get out of it, which is telling me that they're not doing it right. Because if they were, you'd have a lot more companies moving the needle significantly and much more quickly. So this is really an issue that no one can ignore because the changing demographics is changing marketing. And I think that some get it, like the Proctors and the Cloroxes and the Pepsis, the Hondas and the Toyotas get it. But I'm not so sure that category followers really, they have still a lot of work to do. And it's more internal than it is external.
Well, that's interesting because in reading your book, right, I noticed that the book, The Big Shift, is neither purely practitioner driven nor purely academic. It's actually both. Why did you choose to address marketers as well as CHROs and CEOs all in this one book?
Yeah. Well, you have to write a book with your voice and with your perspective. And I think, when you bridge the gap between academia and business, that's who I am. So I've spent many years in the business world. I left it and went back to school and got a doctorate, and then I got back into business. And to me, it's such a beautiful intersection, right? It's really interesting to sort of think about what we know before we start asking questions in research and understanding the gaps that are currently existing and asking ourselves, why do they exist? And how do we fill them? So, some of the things I wrote in the book were coming out of questions that clients were asking that were really, really hard to answer. And so to me, this is the opportunity for us to underpin the work that we're doing more robustly and more rigorously with marketing relevance that sort of drives the usefulness of the work that we're doing.
Interesting. Okay, so let's dig into the book a bit. What is the Hispanic marketing paradigm and why does it need to change?
So the Hispanic marketing paradigm to me was the way that I started making sense of the business practitioner and all of the rules that governed marketing to Hispanics. And the paradigm really it's less about true science and it's more about what the business practitioner agree together that make up, reality or this collective truth. And I wondered if this paradigm was really close to the consumer. In other words, are we building a paradigm that is driving our business versus the business of the client?
But what is the paradigm? Tell our listeners what's
And
the
so
paradigm.
the Hispanic paradigm, the Hispanic marketing paradigm, to me, has been centered around has been centered around language, has been
Hmm.
centered around Spanish. The narrative has been and continues to be that Hispanics are Spanish preferent. They are culturally different. They're collectivistic. They're family oriented. They're driving online behavior. And so there's this attempt to sort of distinguish Hispanics from other segments. And when you start to kind of challenge or uncover these statements, Hispanics are brand loyal culturally. And so there are all of these things that I started questioning because even though I'm a foreign born Hispanic, I got here when I was 7. So I'm very different from most immigrants that come at a age of 20 or 19 or 25. And
Hmm.
so I started questioning the validity of these questions. And so the Hispanic marketing paradigm to me are the rules that govern Hispanic marketing for the last 30 years, which I began to challenge.
Well, but they were created by us, right? People in the Hispanic marketing world, and
So
and now they need to change, is what you're saying.
exactly. So no fault to anybody. We didn't have an industry. You wrote a couple of books about the beginning of the conception of the Hispanic marketing industry, and
Yep.
so we understand that it peaked. It sort of made its debut in the late '80s, early '90s, and there was a lot of traction. Telemundo and Univision certainly is at the core of this paradigm,
Hmm.
and they help obviously with Nielsen, in measuring some of these principles, these paradigms, these elements that feed into the paradigm. And so it's not so much that we were wrong. It made sense for us to start somewhere, and that's where we started. We didn't have it digital. There was no social, and we had linear TV. We had no mobile, and so it made sense that we started with television, and we started with language. 30 years later, and 2 generations of consumers later, we have a lot more to choose from. And we have now 60 million Hispanics, 65% of whom are US born. By the way, we have always had more US born Hispanics in this country, a 3-to-1 ratio, right? 65-35 split. And so
Even more, right? Because we were here before the Pilgrims, but let's not even go there. But
and
but
that
but
and that's why, and that's really one of the reasons why we've always had more US born Hispanics, because we had been here before those that immigrated.
but
And so
the paradigm you're referring to really starts in the 80s, right? When Spanish language media starts to explode in this country. And what you're saying is it needs to change because everything has changed. Hispanics
exactly.
have changed, the media has changed, the media landscape has changed. And but and fundamentally it's not that Spanish is not valid, it's that it's Spanish and, right? It's Spanish and English. Is that the
That's
point?
right. So 65% of Hispanics in the US are bicultural,
Hmm.
right? So if we use the Nielsen quintiles, only a percentage, about 10 or 15% are monolingual, speak only Spanish, and about another 10 or 15% are monolingual, English only. So when you look at the middle three, that's your best measure for bicultural Hispanics. Whether some are leading with Spanish or speak more than Spanish, or others speak more than English, right? It's a level of bilingualism that I think makes up this bicultural demographic. My point is that we should not, and it's a big miss, obviously. And the book that I wrote spells out a nativity based view on media that says that we can do better. We can help drive media ROI with a nativity based view by looking at the impact of nativity rather than language. Language is fine. We are saying language is important. It is a subset of culture, but it is not the uber variable that we started with in the 1990s. And so we need to place that in its proper place. If there are better ways to drive ROI or better ways to segment the market that is in addition to language or instead of language, we ought to do that.
So I heard you present the nativity-based view at a conference maybe 5 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
and I seem to recall it was a bit controversial. How has it been received so far?
Well, the companies that seem to think of it as controversial are the ones whose business models are mostly threatened by it, which I think
Sure.
is with that
Spanish language
saying.
media. Yeah.
But we've been very successful. I know that we've shifted about $500 million from TV into digital
Who do you say
because,
we? When you say we, who do you refer to? You
well,
and your clients?
clients, absolutely. So, I've had to work alone in this endeavor because the industry hasn't really been receptive in the nativity-based view. That's why you're suggesting it's controversial. It's controversial because it doesn't align or support everyone's business model. And so I get that. What I'm surprised, though, is that the nativity-based view is a proven Nielsen-based methodology that can help clients drive media ROI. And so companies that, for instance, most companies today, more media companies today have a big platform. They have digital, they have other media properties in English and Spanish. And so instead of selling the vertical, they're selling the horizontal. So at the end of the day, clients should not be so concerned about how much goes into Spanish language or how much goes into digital, as long as they're driving ROI. So that if we take a client-centric approach, the advertising agency, Chiqui, should be able to speak to a U.S.-born bicultural English-speaking consumer. They've chosen not to for reasons
Well, because it
that,
costs money. I mean, I'm gonna what you're suggesting, and I'm not disagreeing with you.
yeah,
Suggests that then you need to, like all good marketers, right? You need to have your segmentations, and you need to have your English creative, and you need your Spanish creative, and you need, and the same could be said for Chinese, right, or Korean or whatever.
yeah,
Is that really the main rub, that the budgets are still limited, and that, like, give me unpack if you can, and don't
yeah,
have to use clients' names, but
yeah.
maybe just say the category. Unpack the nativity-based view and how it worked for a client.
Yeah, so the nativity-based view essentially. So let me give you the logic, and then I'll
Okay.
walk you down to a media exercise. So the impact of nativity on population. So instead of looking at the aggregate, we look at the first, second, and third plus generations, right? We look at the population of Hispanics by nativity, and roughly out of the 60 million, the census is telling us that there are about 20 million foreign-born, about 20 million second gen, and about 20 million. So they're evenly distributed, which is pretty interesting. So of the 60, 40 million are U.S. born. When you apply a nativity-based view on the Nielsen quintiles, we're finding that about 60% of the foreign-born are Spanish dominant, meaning they speak more Spanish than English, or I should say, and Spanish only at home. But when you look at it on second and third plus generations, you now are seeing a flip. You're saying that 60% of the second gen are English dominant, speak only English at home or more English than Spanish. And when you look at the third generation, they're 90% English dominant. And so that's, again, more English than Spanish, and English only at home.
Right.
So we didn't stop. So that was sort of my process: the impact of population, the impact of nativity on language use at home, and then we looked at the impact of nativity on ratings of Spanish language TV. And we saw, instead of looking at the aggregate of 18 to 49 aggregate, Hispanic aggregate, or an 18 to 34 aggregate, we now wanted to look at, forget the ages, let's look at the U.S. born, foreign born. And in my book, we don't actually spell out the rating points, but we rank order the players in Spanish language and English language. And we're finding that the majority of the television companies reaching the foreign-born are in Spanish, which makes sense.
Of course.
However, when you look at the U.S.-born, the overwhelming majority, like 7 or 8 out of 10, are in English. And so,
and super fragmented, right?
in what way? From a
Across
media
media.
standpoint?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
So harder to reach, but well worth it.
Well, but here's the answer is yes, but here's the more interesting pattern. The ratings for English language for the US born is very low on linear TV. And that's because these young, and it's not even 18 to 34, it's 18 to 49. The US born are, they're on digital. And so when linear TV is flat and close to that one, point rating, it's just so low compared to the foreign born. You've got 2 or 3 that are driving ratings, and then it kind of dips and then it just flattens out. So you know who those players are based on who they are and what they've been doing for years. But to aggregate the US and the foreign born into one is really inefficient. So now that we know better, I would say focus on the foreign born, and they are definitely different. They have different levers. They have different tension points. They have different issues on awareness. They have consideration issues. They have distribution differences. They're different people. They are Spanish first, maybe Spanish only, but that's 35% of the market. And when you start looking at television, the ratings are really low and flat, but they're leaning towards English, which makes sense because it supports the language-based differences by nativity that we're seeing. Then we went to a nativity-based approach, and we started looking at QSR, automotive, and telecom, 3 big categories for the industry. And we're finding consistently, based on Nielsen data, and with their permission, we published some interesting information. About 80%, and it's gotten worse, not better, over the last couple of years, because we haven't done this just for 6 months or a year. We've been doing this for a good 5 or 6 years, maybe longer, actually. But since I've published the work, everything can be replicated, Chiqui. But my point is that, between 70 and 80, the last time that we pulled the Nielsen ratings, it was up to 80% of Spanish language TV did not reach Latino millennials. And so we ought to be just more cognizant that, there are differences, and we know these differences better. I bumped into this, Chiqui, because someone in the automotive industry asked me how I could help her drive media ROI. And I had no clue how I was going to do that, other than, listen, let me just think about it. And I basically deconstructed an acculturation model and started thinking about the variables that could impact media ROI. And I ran into things like years in the country. We looked at, a number of factors. And some things actually were better than language. If I'm going to target Hispanics online, not everybody is going to be speaking Spanish. And so what happens to, because I worked for me too. And we were targeting a bilingual, bicultural Latina, 18 to 34 millennial. And we knew that it wasn't even about the language. It was really about the content. And we could put content up that was all in Spanish and all in English, or had no language. It was all music based. It just drove based on insights. So let's kind of place language where it should, and let the insights drive the strategy. And language is actually more of a tactic if you think about it, right? You and we chose to speak in English in this interview, but you and I are very bicultural.
Yep.
Right.
And I just wanted to clarify for our listeners, Me Too is MITU, not the Me Too movement, which is
good clarity.
Yeah, it's a channel, right? For millennials, Hispanics, right?
That's right.
Today, the majority of Americans under the age of 18 are multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
By 2028, which is literally around the corner, the majority of Americans under the age of 35 will be multicultural.
Mm-hmm.
So as the so-called mainstream, which I want to stop calling it that, because I think we need to start by example, right? As the so-called mainstream reaches a multicultural tipping point, marketers will need to develop new measures to track marketing results, right?
Mm-hmm.
Why is our data so bad? But wait, don't answer that question. We need to take a short break for some quick announcements, and then we'll see you on the other side.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
What can you tell us about the ethnicity race view, and how should marketers listening to this podcast change their data sources in order to get the right perspective on their consumers?
Thanks for asking that question, Chiqui. One of the chapters, I have to admit, in one of the chapters, I talked about the ethnicity race view as if it's a new tool. But I just really wanted to underscore the fact that we need to start looking at data by ethnicity and race, not just in aggregate. Yeah. You and I have been talking about, unemployment rate and some of these macroeconomic indicators in aggregate. But when you start to disaggregate the aggregate, you start to see, and this is a perfect example, we wouldn't understand the impact that COVID has on African Americans or Latinos if we didn't disaggregate the big unemployment number. We need to do a better job with measurement or measuring sales by ethnicity and race. Right now, the data doesn't allow us or is not built to incorporate some of these fine metrics. And so a lot of the things that we're measuring are proxies or estimates that are based on, say, the population density or the ethnicity break of a zip code when you're estimating a sale or a volume number of something for a CPG. So, instead of actually tracking the dollar that this person, Jake Beniflah, has spent at a CVS yesterday, you can't attribute it down to the ethnicity and race. But once we can do that, then we are going to be in a better position, and clients can then feel more comfortable in investing in these groups because measures are better. And so the onus really is on the measurement companies and on clients to push those measurement companies to do better. As we think about research, Chiqui, I can tell you that the large research companies in the US do not have a nationally representative sample when it comes to Hispanic or Asian. This is a big, big problem. And so what I'm hearing is, well, we know, but until companies tell us to change, we won't change because change is obviously costly. So I kept saying to them, this is time to be a thought leader. So this is the time to lead the market versus sort of respond to it. And so to put a cap on this, measurement always lags progress. And so we're at the point we can't just keep kicking the can down the road. We got to do something about this now.
So we need to get people like Mark Pritchard and maybe people at Unilever to say, okay, we're not going to buy your services unless you start really reflecting the customer better. Maybe that's what it takes. I don't know.
Well, I mean, think of why we've done so well with digital so quickly. Let's just go to Procter & Gamble. It's data driven, but also, Mark Pritchard has said, I'm going to pull $1 billion of digital dollars if you don't figure out the fraud issue. He made it a big issue, a big platform 2 years ago, and it scared. Madison Avenue was scared because that's a lot of money, and so and people follow him. Companies say if he's going to do that, and he's a successful guy, I'm going to do the same thing. So corporate America is in a position, and I always talk about this. They are in a position to drive social change. They're in a position to make progress happen very quickly, if it wanted to. And so they're not their job and the reason for living is not to change the country. But there is an opportunity for them to step up and to be the leaders and the change agents, which is going to help their business as well.
Well, the whole point is that if they do make these changes, then they can drive the business, right? I mean, right?
That's right.
That's why you wrote this book. I mean, and you wrote this book in 2020. I just published it right now in 2021.
Yes.
But so in a few months, in in a few weeks, we're going to have the first results of the census. What do you think it's going to say? And do you think it'll be enough for people to say, "Oh my God, we really need to start changing the way we do this in order to grow our businesses"?
Again, we've been there. We've been through these cycles long enough to know that a lot of companies who know enough are going to say or ask themselves, what more can I do? Do we know enough about this and that? The companies that they have a good process, they have a lot of data, are just going to be hunkering down and nose to the ground. They're going to do what they're supposed to do. But there's going to be a lot of companies who are going to be inspired by the numbers, and because the numbers are just going to get bigger, the numbers are going to get more multicultural, and in some cases you're going to see a decline. In many cases, actually, you're going to see a decline of non-Hispanic whites in major cities. You're seeing that already in New York, right? You're seeing that across many cities, and you start looking at it by age cohort. It's even scarier. So,
but you're conflating. Well, not conflating. You're talking about the pandemic results, but also the older, whiter baby boomers are moving away from New York, but they're going to Florida, honey, or to California.
I'm talking about a population shift. Aside from the pandemic, the population of whites in this country is declining. And we're seeing that at the DMA level. This is why I'm saying we have to think about winning in these markets with different consumers. We're not saying that the non-Hispanic whites are not important. They're still driving, share of volume. The growth, however, is coming from the Hispanic, Black, and let's not forget the powerful Asian, 5%. Yep. So the shift is the need to shift is real. The census will give us ammunition or some fuel to make these changes or shifts more quickly. A portion of the book is really talks about what organizations need to do internally. So we can talk about the external environment all we want, but the companies who cannot change the organization are the ones that are going to lag progress. It'll take a while to get there.
In fact, that's exactly my next question. I was really surprised to read the last 3 chapters of your book are really focused on mental models and leadership and dynamic organizational capabilities, which I find fascinating that if you don't have all 3 of those working together, marketing teams can't deliver results, right?
That's right. It's funny. I was telling my wife this, that I said, we have the data, but we don't have the courage to change. So we need courage, we need more courage than data to change. In the end, I'm thinking that this issue is really about mental models, because we have the data. The question is, why aren't you using the data? Why aren't you applying the data? And so it's really about the mental models. And I think that, if we had a reflection at the top of the organization, and if you looked at this, opportunity through a lens of economics, where the color is the only color is green, right? Then really you start making fact-based decisions. So a lot of this is about evolving and developing capabilities like measurement and putting the right people in the organization to help them reflect and understand consumers. I consulted for Clorox for 1.5 years, and being embedded in an organization that is very monolithic taught me that my point of view mattered. And so I could speak to a lived experience. I could speak to what I knew from my PhD and the academic research that I had done. I can speak to some of these things that, they were not privy to in their own research. So all of these differences and similarities, we all make this really nice, rich team. The problem is moving companies from a monolithic to a multicultural organization isn't going to be something that happens, overnight. And it probably won't even happen in 5 years unless it really is at the top with embedded in the values of the organization. And then secondly, you then read the annual reports. And if multicultural isn't a part of that language, it's not a multicultural organization. And so when I look at an annual report and I'm reading that they love its sustainability, they love, diversity in their supply chain, blah, blah, blah. But if they don't have this language, if they don't say that they're driving the organization through a multicultural consumer, it's just talk. So it really has to be at the highest level, and it really takes a long time and the right people, the right sort of perfect storm for that to happen.
But clearly among those people are the CHRO, right? The Chief Human Resources Officer and the CEO.
Yeah.
Have to believe in this. Who else needs to be? I mean, obviously, these are the two of the big drivers within an organization.
So finance. I mean, I think the CFO is really hidden from from these conversations, but that's where the dollars are decided, where the dollars go. The chief diversity officers, there are a lot more of them now in corporations. My only worry is that we're dealing with sort of a knee jerk reaction to what we're seeing in the market. And I'm optimistic, but I'm also pessimistic in the sense that, there's a tendency for corporate America to jump to the next problem, to address the next thing. And so this to me isn't, something that we can sort of look behind our backs and in the rearview mirror. This is something that we're going to have to address moving forward. I don't think the millennial and even, the next cohort of consumers are going to be they won't allow corporations to not have a corporate social responsibility.
Right. And we need to differentiate between the important work that diversity, equity, and inclusion is internally, but that's not multicultural marketing. Multicultural marketing is pure marketing, but focusing on these segments of race and ethnicity.
Yeah, in my book, and I would actually even not use the word multicultural marketing because the associations there are that you're dealing with a vertical silo that is separate from the mainstream. And so I think about this as marketing in a multicultural America.
That's right.
Or, and so that I think that is marketing in the 21st century. The idea of DE&I, and that's the issue that I'm seeing, right? Like we're talking about diversity and inclusion, but we're not tying it to the growth of the organization. We need to. This is really about organizational transformation. And if they don't see it that way, they're gonna come back to this issue 10 years, 15 years from now, maybe not. This is not a way to kind of placate the a growing and increasing voice within the organization, or something the company needs to do to sort of look good in a marketplace or business landscape that is demanding change. There are customers out there that are multicultural, and they have choices. And I think that once companies start to understand how some companies are using this to their advantage at a competitive level, they're not going to be able to ignore it. They're going to see it as a growth mandate.
I wholeheartedly agree. I want to ask this one question again. We've spoken about Spanish language media and the Hispanic marketing world. And I just want to be clear, because we both have worked there. We all have friends. Some people in the Hispanic marketing world really have criticized you for being anti-Spanish language media. But that's not true, right? What you're saying in this book is Spanish has a role. Spanish language media has an important role, actually, to play. But it's only part of the mix.
No, absolutely. And so I've heard that criticism. In fact, I've heard people tell me that I'm killing their business. It's unlikely that one person is going to take down an industry. And so I think that's foolish and untrue. Listen, most of my friends are in the Hispanic business, in the agency world, on the media side, on the research side. I know more people in that space than most people do in marketing. So, what we ought to do, instead of looking at this through a publisher model, clients look at this as a consumer model. So they're looking at this very agnostically. And I would say that if today you're doing a great job with a Spanish language consumer, if you choose, there is an opportunity there to broaden your target and address 60% of the market that is not on your platform. And so this is not really about language. Really, it's really not about language for the client, right? Clients are looking for consumers. And so they're not, and so we can go there, but publishers have their own business model, and we have to understand that. And those business models don't align with the models and the interest of corporate America. And that's what I found. And so if they don't like my nativity-based view that moves language, that changes the standard from language to nativity, then that's not my problem. I'm here to help clients, and I can tell you that we've moved dollars, like significant dollars. And I have big companies in New York that are, at the upfronts are shifting $200 million into digital. And you know what? It's not because of me. It's because the consumer is going digital.
Well, but there's Spanish and English digital, right? So,
that's true. That's true. Again, but what I'm saying is, Chiqui, 60%, 65% of the market is U.S. born. They are not going. I mean, Nielsen and ComScore, and you can even do your own primary research. The data is going to tell us very clearly that this nativity-based view provides a different segment of the population, and in that segment of the population is not all on Spanish language media.
Gotcha. Loud and clear. Before I let you go, I know the book just got published. How's it being received?
I've been busy since our launch. I love it. I mean, I've been busy. I've been really, really busy. I can tell you that I've launched the book into global organizations. I'm speaking, in different places, social media companies. There's, obviously there's a lot more diversity conversations in the air right now than I was planning. And so, I think there's a lot of interest in the book. Once the census comes with demographic information, I think this will continue to be sort of, at the forefront of people's thoughts. But right now, I think there's a lot of discussions on social inequity, racial justice, and sort of deciding what companies do and don't do, and rightfully so. But the book is great. I'm excited about talking about it with you, and want to thank you again for the opportunity.
Oh, no. Thank you for sharing your story and your expertise and your insight. Should people want to buy your book, where can they get it? Where should they go?
It's on Amazon for $19.99, and there's also an ebook version, so you can get that as well if you like.
Okay, wonderful. And you, dear listener, thank you for tuning in. If you found this episode helpful, then don't be shy and let us know through your comments and ratings. And consider subscribing to our off-the-shelf podcast series or other podcast offerings by the Conference Board. You can find them at www.conference-board.org/podcast. And with that, I say thanks again, Jake, y hasta pronto.
Thank you so much. Hasta pronto.
This has been Off the Shelf, a podcast by the Conference Board.